it's been an interesting journey of finding my identity and different parts of myself, and especially women of color need to prove their competence repeatedly. It hasn't always been easy, but it's a journey I wouldn't take for granted and wouldn't change for the world. We face higher standards than, our male counterparts to be perceived as equally competent. This means that some women might feel the need to navigate extra carefully, like walk on eggshells, to avoid backlash and potentially even limiting their professional or career growth. Constantly having to provide additional endless evidence of capabilities.
There are many stories out there of strength, resilience and courage, and we're on a mission to bring them all to you. Welcome to Empowered Voices Amplified, a podcast by Skilled Migrant Professionals magazine.
Our guest today is Ruhee Meghani. Ruhee is the founder of Allied Collective, Australia's first inclusive facilitation and wellbeing agency that prioritizes purpose-led leadership development through future-focused training. With over 12 years of experience across well-being, retail, advertising, sports management, hospitality, Ruhee is a thought leader, a yoga teacher, and a public speaker. And I've had the privilege of looking at and following her on LinkedIn. Her content is incredible. With an academic background in psychology and business management, she is the leading voice in inclusive well-being and making wellness accessible for communities and organizations. Ruhee also serves as Regional Advisory Council member at the Victorian Multicultural Commission, where she advocates for and on behalf of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Welcome to the show, Ruhee. How are you?
Thank you, and so lovely to be here, Magnus and Sandra. Thank you so much for having me. It's an incredible honor.
Oh, we are so happy to have you here. We've stalked you for a little bit. I'm sure you know that now. And we absolutely love all the work that you're doing and the content that you put out there. So this is a really big question, but tell us your story.
Yeah, I'd love to. And yeah, I think where do I start? I was born and raised in Mumbai, the land of Bollywood. I moved to Australia about 11 years ago. And like you said, I have an academic background in psychology, business management, in marketing, and I'm also a yoga teacher by passion. So I think uh, I identify as a generalist. So I love learning everything about everything. And it's been an interesting journey of finding my identity and different parts of myself and embracing different eras of who I am and who I am yet to be. And it's just a privilege to even talk about my journey as well. So I founded Allied Collective about 3 years ago. And as of early last year, I took the leap into pursuing my business full time. And it hasn't always been easy, but it's a journey I wouldn't take for granted and wouldn't change for the world.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot that you've done. And you've spoken a lot about, so in your work and in the, because I know that you are very passionate about inclusivity and well-being as well, but you've spoken a lot about the prove it again bias in your interview with Mavens. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience in corporate Australia and why this term and exactly, what it means?
Yeah, firstly, we'd like to acknowledge Leah and Mavens and all the work they've done and your incredible interview as well in the magazine. We just need so many platforms like this, including this podcast, to elevate the voices of women who've been, historically underserved. When it comes to prove it again bias, it's also known as the double bind, and it occurs when women, and especially women of color, need to prove their competence repeatedly. And we face higher standards than, our male counterparts to be perceived as equally competent. And in the same conversation, parallel to that is also the tightrope bias, which is the challenge that we face when we're perceived as either competent but not likable, which means we're labeled as too aggressive or too assertive, but likable and not competent, which means we're perceived as too passive or not too outgoing, so they must be lacking in skills. So it's kind of a lot of women find themselves walking this tightrope, finding the need to balance assertiveness with likability. And this means that some women might feel the need to navigate extra carefully, like walk on eggshells, to avoid backlash and potentially even limiting their professional or career growth. And a lot of women, including myself, our achievements are often questioned or overlooked, and constantly having to provide additional endless evidence of capabilities. And we know that women, and especially women of color in positions of power, are not judged by the same yardstick as their male counterparts. And we see this in real life. For example, in the news, how female politicians get reported versus male politicians. Julia Gillard and Jacinta Ardern get questions around their clothes, their motherly duties, and are you meeting with the Finnish prime minister because you're similar in age? And can be exhausting for women, right? Because in my experience, I've had to work twice as hard to get half as far and half as paid as my counterparts. And they might, that I may not have had the same privilege as them, and, still be asked ridiculously stupid questions in interviews and constantly hitting glass ceilings. For example, I had to interview 4 rounds for a role that I was pretty much already doing, but still having to prove myself through 4 rounds of interviews that yes, I am capable for this role. So and this is kind of what the prove it again bias is you have to keep proving again and again that I'm capable, I'm competent. And we have data to back this as well. So they looked at some performance reviews and they showed that women were 1.4 times more likely to receive vague feedback on their character or subjective performance, and men were more likely to receive feedback which was concrete, which was objective, and could lead them faster to promotion. And there's so much data around this. We know that almost 50% of women of color had been criticized for their behaviors, that other colleagues could get away with at work. We have to water down so much of ourselves, whether it's changing the language that we use, the topics that we talk about, our hairstyles, our accent. Can we bring our food to work? And even our names, we have to water down our names, our beautiful names.
Oh, I mean, as you were talking, these are some of the topics that Sandra and I, have explored. And Sandra and I have been friends for a really long time. So our conversations are always really in depth and meaning. And one of the things you mentioned about how women have to present themselves, particularly in corporate, that is so true. And it's something that I faced. It's something that a lot of women are faced, where you have to tone down how you question. And again, on the feedback, being told that maybe you need to be a bit softer. That was the feedback I received once, that I
Oh my
needed to be a
God.
bit softer. And I was so confused. I don't know what that means.
That is so vague. Exactly. Like, what does it mean?
Very much so. I remember being told once it was about moving to the next level in a role that I was
Yeah.
already doing but not yet being paid for it. And
Mm.
I think my manager said, I can't explain what you need to do, but I'll know when you're doing it. Okay.
Whoa.
I didn't stay much longer after that, as you can imagine. But, as soon as you said vague, I went, oh, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. It's like
That is
you're not
incredibly
there,
vague.
but
Mm.
I can't tell you when to get, how to get there and when you are there. It's like,
Yeah.
can't
And
win.
even in seemingly objective evaluation, I guess, thresholds, right? We mark people in their performance evaluations on effective communication. But what does that mean? Because we're
Yes.
all so culturally diverse, and
Mm.
our communication styles are so beautifully different that
Mm.
the one set of what efficient communication looks like to a manager may not be the same that is displayed by their team member. So it's again, there's so many double binds that happen in this
Mm.
case.
Absolutely.
Big
Yeah,
topic.
very interesting. We could continue on this for an hour, but I did have some more questions for you. So, as Em mentioned earlier, you're the lead facilitator and founder of Allied Collective. Tell us a bit more about what you do and why this work is important to you.
The work that I do with Allied Collective and the reason why I call myself a facilitator or an inclusive facilitator, if we look at the word facilitating, it comes from the word facilis, which literally means to make easy. So when I go into a room, whether it's either training, coaching, or leading a conversation or a problem solving workshop, we make things easy for the people in the room. And the reason why I founded this company is because I know what it feels like to experience a system and its barriers while also trying to change that very system. And we're heading towards a future of work where people are starting to realize that work is a part of our life, it's not our whole life. And well being, in one sense, it means so much more than a 1 hour yoga session and meditation sessions at work. Those are important, but we need to look beyond that. How are we making people's lives easy? People want to feel engaged, they want flexibility, they want to feel challenged, they want to feel autonomy and purpose in their lives, not just at work, but also outside of work. And I talk about this in something I've developed called the Dimensions of Wellbeing framework. And when we think about well-being, right, often what comes to mind is exercise, nutritious food, perhaps therapy. And those are very important. But what often gets ignored or what is not being talked about more is that if you're stuck in a toxic workplace environment, or if you don't have the security or the financial well-being to be able to afford basic necessities, it will affect other areas of your life, including physical. And we know that stress related illness is such a big thing. And we're collectively, globally going through an epidemic of burnout, of loneliness, being disconnected, experiencing collective grief. So, and we have to realize that our systems are interconnected and interdependent. So, in short, I coach, I train, I facilitate, and I adopt a principle called nothing for you without you, which means I don't do copy paste sessions. I go into the room understanding the unique needs of the room, of the people in the room, and then work backwards to find a solution for the workplace or the team or the person in that space.
Wonderful. It's such important work. And we know that you're a great advocate for inclusion and equity. We love you for. We love that sort of,
Thank
to
you.
hear those stories. What role do you see inclusion and equity playing in economic development for countries or for society?
I think we're seeing this unfurl in real life in today's very global working marketplace where, remote jobs are all the rage. And I think to a certain extent, we're past the business case for inclusion and equity because the most innovative, the most forward thinking companies already know this. And we know that it's getting to a point where equity and inclusion needs to be integrated into your organization, systems, policies, and procedures uh, for a sustainable future. If you want to exist in the long term, you have to have this on your agenda. And we know that more diverse perspectives that there are in the room, the more innovative your company is. And we know that more innovation means more trial and error, but it also means more cutting edge solutions, more economically sound financial decisions because of the lived experience and the diverse perspectives that exist in the room. When you must have experienced when there's I guess, clashing ideas, it often leads to more brilliant ideas. So, they say great minds think alike. That's actually a misnomer. Like the best minds think differently, So, and I think we're seeing, like culturally humble leaders. They have better relationships with international teams, and they have almost an enhanced adaptability of the products and services that they're offering internationally because they know their demographics across the globe. And we know that, when you have global talent, it also increases your competitiveness on an international stage. So, yeah, it's a no brainer. Like equity and inclusion, they do contribute to a more sustainable and resilient economic development model. And it's a no brainer. If you're not doing it, you're not cool.
I'm curious about this. What's your take on, I read this and I found it quite fascinating. It was said to give context to the comment, someone was writing about diversity and inclusion, and one man commented that diversity and inclusion is compromising the quality of talent. What's your take on that? Like, I'm curious, this out of curiosity. And this was not a conversation about race. It was a conversation about gender. And
Yeah.
his response was based on, why do we have to put women in leadership positions?
Yeah, that is, you know what? You would think that it's a rare question, but it's not. And we're starting to see these arguments come forward when we're talking about, gender quotas, gender pay gaps, especially, and looking at targets as well, diversity targets. And in terms of compromising for quality, I would ask that person the question, what does quality mean to you, right? And if you look at it subjectively, we've been narrated such a narrow perspective on what success is, what professionalism is. Who says that, bringing your full self at work is not professional? And having a very specific way of communicating fits your narrow minded perspective of communication. So, in that, I would ask that person to broaden their perspective on what quality means and encourage them to look at the difference between equity and equality, where, historically, we've had people from underserved backgrounds have the door shut in their face. So we haven't even had opportunities to try to get roles that we know we're good at. But again, we get stuck with things like the glass ceiling, the glass cliff, the prove it again bias, which they're real barriers that people um, sometimes don't see unless they check their own privilege.
Very true.
Well, anyone who follows your journey, and anyone who follows your journey knows how passionate you are about well-being. I've seen, your posts on, keeping well, physical well-being, particularly for leaders and their teams in corporate. What role do you think this plays in improving productivity, building high-performing teams, and creating better workplaces?
Yeah, and this is an interesting concept because we're talking about, going away from hustle culture, quote unquote, but then there's this I almost like entry of quiet hustle where we're starting to see like, oh, I'm prioritizing rest, but then are we really allowing ourselves to rest when we allot the time? Are we able to mentally switch off and give ourselves permission without guilt to rest and relax? And this is what I often see in leaders is that they're not always practicing what they're preaching. And yes, there's a huge onus of well-being at the workplace, but leaders set the tone. So if you're getting an email from your leader at 2 a.m. in the morning, it probably is a little bit of a warning sign that, my leader is not embodying the rest that they are perhaps talking about. This is not every case. This is always, like exceptions here and there. And we're living, we're seeing like this tipping point in workplace culture and leadership, especially with the coming of the AI generation and the AI revolution. Again, like I said, burnout seems to be an ongoing epidemic, and leaders aren't encouraged to look after themselves enough. We know that, when teams are mentally and emotionally well, they're more able to focus more, make better decisions, and manage stress better. There's resilience, there's reduced burnout, and there's improved work life balance. When I was talking about the dimensions of well-being, when you have balance in your occupational or work related well-being, you're able to be well in other parts of your life as well. And we know there's so many proven benefits of workplace well-being, not programs necessarily, because like I said, you could have a one-off meditation session, or have a pool table in your office, or have fruit every day and things like that. But there needs to be a culture of well-being, and a culture of well-being starts with the leaders. And there's so many benefits. You not only attract great talent, but you retain them, because who would want to leave a culture where well-being is prioritized? And companies that emphasize well-being, they're more resilient, they're more able to get through tough times together faster. And it just is an overall improvement in the workplace culture. There's less absenteeism, which we know is a huge area that companies want to focus on and get better at. There's more innovation and creativity, because play is such an underrated thing when it comes to well-being. The ability to bring joy into our lives, in our work, and we don't have to take everything so damn seriously all the time.
Oh, yeah, I would have loved to work for a company that prioritizes well-being. I mean, Sandra and I have worked together for two different companies. So it's like we're nodding really hard at this. You, you have extensive experience in psychology, yoga philosophy, and business management. Talk us through this multidisciplinary approach to life.
Yeah, so to clarify, I studied psychology for 2 years. So I did it as like a foundation to my academic journey, and I love learning about people. Like I said, I love learning everything about everything, and I was fascinated. But then I was also very entrepreneurial, so I wanted to learn about business. And the yoga aspect came through my mum, who inspired me by becoming a yoga teacher in her late 40s. So, and I think there's a quote you must have heard: a jack of all is a master of none. But I was elated when I heard the full quote. The full quote actually reads: a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes is better than a master of one. And that was kind of so validating for me, because I really, where I am, and the unique perspective that I have and that I bring in my work and beyond, is because of those different, varied perspectives. It's helped me to be a lifelong learner. And I even studied cybersecurity for a year, because I wanted to have the conversation around technology facilitated gender-based violence. So, and that's the beauty of innovation, right? When you talk about something new, when you start to chart a new territory, you attract people that are excited to talk about new things, and you just kind of you enjoy being in this space of constantly learning. And that's what I really enjoy. And I want to never stop learning, because this intersection is what gives me an edge over everything else, and it allows me to bring something that probably no one else does.
Excellent. I love that. Lifelong learning is one of my passions, and it's you can't stop learning. Every day's a learning day. Every day's if you haven't learned something, then you probably didn't get out of bed that day. You probably still could learn something, not even getting out of bed. Anyway, thank you for that perspective. Now, your journey has been interesting, and you've learned things along the way. What were some of the obstacles that you encountered, and how did you overcome them, or how did you face them?
Yeah, I've spoken a lot about, I guess, systemic and structural barriers that I've faced, but I think, and there's always personal life stories that teach you so much about who you are. So I think outside of that, it comes to the yogic concept of swadhyay for me, which means in Sanskrit, self-knowledge, self-reflection. And the obstacle, one of the biggest obstacles that I'm constantly getting over, is this self-limiting belief of, you're getting in your own way, whether it's self-doubt, whether it's that little voice in your head: oh, am I being too much? Am I asking too much? Will they say yes? So it's kind of really honing into my gut feeling and what it says and being scared and doing it anyway, and speaking up about the things that matter, even if, my voice shakes or my hands are shaking. I recently did a post that I was genuinely passionate about, but it scared me really like hard. And the amount of support that I received off the back of that has been game changing. So I think a few lessons that I've learned there is, listening to my gut. Like always listen to your gut because it never lies. Leaning on community. So being curious and not judgmental. This quote is from Ted Lasso and I love it. And you will face, I guess, challenging characters and personalities in your life, but every interaction is a learning, positive or negative. So I guess just being curious and then moving on, and tapping into that inner resilience. And one more thing that I've learned is if you don't ask, the answer will always be no. So don't
Mm.
ask, don't get, always ask, and no one is going to save you except for you.
I love that. That links into my own personal one, which is ask for forgiveness, not for permission. Sometimes you
Yes, I love that.
can get you into trouble, but like you say, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Exactly.
So what keeps you inspired and motivated these days, and empowered to continue your journey, and your own sources of motivation?
Yeah, like I said, learning from people's stories in particular. I'm really passionate about storytelling, and we know that, generations and generations, we as humans have existed, told our stories, made changes, and shifted communities, and what do you call it? Storytelling. We as humans have, through generations, shifted stories, communities, constitutions, even through storytelling. And we have this innate power of shifting behavior and motivating people simply through the power of storytelling. And I think that is what constantly keeps me motivated, inspired, and learning, knowing that there are giants in front of me, behind me, and who've come before me, that if they can do it, I can have a little bit more courage and have a little bit of audacity or a lot of audacity to follow in their footsteps. And I think we have so many role models, and thanks to channels like these, we are able to have more visible role models that they're relatable, their story resonates with us. So yeah, storytelling changes the world.
Absolutely. Let's all be more audacious. Let's do it.
And do it scared anyway. I absolutely love that. Like, do it scared. The easy things. Someone says to me actually this morning that the things you celebrate the most are usually the things that scare you the most. They'll just scare
Mm,
you really a lot at the beginning, but they're the ones that are really worth celebrating at the end. And I thought, wow, that's really true. That's really,
that's a
really true.
beautiful that's a
Yeah,
beautiful reminder.
It is.
absolutely.
Well, we've enjoyed this having a conversation with you, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people want to know where they can connect with you. Where's the best place people can connect with you?
Of course. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So you can find me at Ruhee, Ruhee Meghani, Meghani. And I have my website called alliedcollective.com.au. If you want to send me an email, you can get in touch with me through there. But it's been an incredible honor to speak with you both as well. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
Oh, it's a
thank you
pleasure. The honour's
again, Rui.
ours. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yes, exactly what Sandra said. Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Empowered Voices Amplified, where we tell stories of empowered individuals. If you have any questions or contributions that you'd like to make, feel free to send us a note and we will get back to you. Thanks again for your support in listening to our show, and we look forward to seeing you next time.